This is your Cosmic Briefing, a short clip from the URANTIA Book for Dummies. Please, stand by.
Okay, so here now, let's get out the drawing board and see what we can scramble together that will help make this just a little bit clearer. From our last section on balance, we learned that the reality of the universe is based on three actualities of reality: things, meanings, and values. Well, a few years back, the Harvard School of Business and their School of Medicine, their psychology department, teamed up to determine what were the major elements that gave one a sense of feeling successful in life. They determined that there were 7 determining factors in what constituted a successful life. They were the ingredients of the good life, if you would. And in reverse order, here they are. Number 7, know yourself. This is part of the maturing process. To know your own mind, know what you like, know what you need, know who you are. Number 6, personal fulfillment. To feel that one is making a difference, that somehow you were important and that it was important that you were here. Number 5 was worthy goals and ideals. This was based on values, and that how your values must keep growing. Number 4 was financial freedom. Now, for some, this meant just the freedom to go into a bookstore and buy a book. For others, hundreds and thousands of dollars, it just never seemed to be enough. Number 3 was loving relationships. This really was the heart of it all. Everything that was important came in this category of number 3. But number 2, health and energy, was a little more important because it was not just the freedom from pain and suffering, but it was an enthusiasm for life. And the number 1 element that people felt that they really needed in order to feel successful, to feel that life was worth living and that it was important, was peace of mind. This wasn't just freedom from stress and strain, but it was to be in touch with that deepest part of yourself. So if this is what they say that we need, then what is the number 1 element that assists us in getting this? Well, the URANTIA book tells us that it's education. In paper 37, we read, "The entire universe is one vast school. The methods employed in many of these higher schools is beyond the human concept of the art of teaching truth, but this is the keynote of the whole educational system. Character acquired by enlightened experience." The papers tell us in paper 71, education is the business of living. It must continue throughout a lifetime so that mankind may gradually experience the ascending levels of mortal wisdom, which are: number 1, knowledge of things. Number 2, the realization of meanings. Number 3, the appreciation of values. The 3 actualities of reality. Number 4, the nobility of work, what they called duty. Number 5, the motivation of goals. For this they call it morality. Number 6, the love of service. This they called character. And the 7th, cosmic insight. This was spiritual discernment. And then, it goes on, by means of these achievements, many will ascend to the mortal ultimate of mind attainment. So we see here the importance of education. It gives us a new understanding of what it is that we need and allows us to explore options and methods whereby we can create a plan of action to achieve those things we need and to bring into our lives the elements necessary for a successful life. The Urantia book tells us that there are two elements that we need. A strong motivation, as in number 5 up above, and 2, we need to come from high intention. That's an important word in our culture these days. The word motivation means to provide with a motive, and motive means that which moves someone. Here the Urantia book tells us that it is our dominant thoughts that lead us to our highest growth. It's our thinking that prepares the favorable conditions for growth. But here in paper 109 it says, "But your unsteady and rapidly shifting mental attitudes often result in thwarting the plans and interrupting the work of your growth." And here it says, "The work is not only interfered with by your innate natures, but this is also greatly retarded by your own preconceived opinions, settled ideas, and long-standing prejudices." So, how does this get in the way? Well, human beings are meaning-seeking missiles. We have learned that these three things, meanings, and values, are the three elements of reality. In paper 100 it says, "In physical life, the senses tell of the existence of things. Mind discovers the reality of meanings, but the spiritual experience reveals to the individual the true values of life." Here's how this works. Science tells us that we live in a sea of energy. We gather information and data about our world through our 5 sense organs. They take in this information from the environment and they send it to the brain. The brain then processes this information and tells your body how to respond. The 5 senses, of course, 5 organs, are eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin. This information travels through our nervous system into our brains, and through a fancy Wi-Fi mind system of circuits called the mind, which we'll deal with as we move along here, which transcends the brain-body, and it is here in the mind where we make meaning of what we are taking in. Once we have this information, we form opinions about what we are taking in. And we have been doing so since we were born. Babies have no inhibitors. They poop, they pee, they run with scissors. Their first words is often no. But eventually our parents teach us how the world works and usually gives us their opinions just to get us started. Many of us hold on to them for life. Now, the interesting thing about opinions is that humans have a tendency to take information that supports our opinions and filters out information that does not support our opinions. It's called selective filtering. So everyone develops a different set of opinions. And what do they want to do with them? Of course, give them to you. Seems like the story of my life. But once we've developed these opinions a little bit, they help us to reach certain conclusions about the way the world works, the way life is. And once we have formed good, solid conclusions, these become part of our belief system. And these then in turn become our small t truth. As you can see here, this becomes our window. As we draw these lines around this becomes the window that we look out of into the world, and which we take information about the world in through this selective filtering process. And we call this our worldview. In paper 112 of the Urantia book, it says this: "It is through the mediation of mind that the self and the environment establish meaningful contact. The ability and willingness of the organism to make such significant contacts with the environment, response to our drives, our willingness to engage with the world, etc., represent the attitude of the whole personality." But today the word attitude has kind of got a bad rap. So we use the word worldview to represent what the Urantia book calls our personal philosophy of living, this worldview or this attitude about how we make decisions as we move through this labyrinth of life on our tightrope. This is our basic frame of reference of how you see the world, of the information that you are continually taking in, building upon, renovating, rebuilding as you interact with your environment wherever you are on the planet. Paper 112 says physical life is a process taking place not so much within the organism as between the organism and the environment. And every such process tends to create and establish organismal patterns of reaction to such an environment. And all such directive patterns are highly influential in goal choosing. We can see that if we run a scenario through this model, we can see that these directive organismal patterns of reaction to such an environment and how they work is very interesting. My experience has taught me that most people have formed their existing philosophy worldview in this way. So it starts out like this. So we have an intention to go and do something. Get married, have a family, change jobs, start a business. For our purpose, let's start with this one. You find your bank account empty, and there's still so much month left, and you are at the end of your money. Yikes. We've all been there. We instantly see that we need to get a big bag of money. This is our intention. So we pass this through our worldview, our opinions, conclusions, belief, and truth, and form certain more opinions, consciously or unconsciously, about our ability to do this. We then make choices and decisions, and we follow up our decisions with actions and behaviors, and voila, we get a result. What the URANTIA book sometimes calls the fruits of your labor, fruits of your effort. And so now we've got a result, and we look at our result and we form certain judgments about it. What we normally would call positive or negative, depending on the outcome or what the result looks like. URANTIA book does not use judgment words like positive and negative, good or bad. Something is either effective or ineffective at helping you to progress and stay on the tightrope of life. If we get a result that is, in your judgment, you deem positive, then a celebration of some sort takes place, right? Sometimes it's just a fist pump, yes. Sometimes it's a bottle of champagne with a friend. But if we get a result that we judge as negative, I look in the bag and, oh my God, no money, then what so many of us do is begin to play the fault-blame game. We look for somebody to pin this on, or something to pin this on, to explain our bad result. And this is where things get terribly messy. We see this in the people all around us all the time. Check your social media account, right? And what's worse, we see it in our leadership. That's another story for later. So this is where so many of us run into what we call the 3 R's of error action. We see that there are 3 R's in the word error. E-R-R-O-R. The first R represents the word resist. When we find that someone that we think was responsible for this negative result, we develop a certain resistance to them. Eventually, this resistance leads to the second R of error, which is the word resent. We begin to resent them. And boy, how resentment can build up as we ruminate and ruminate on these great injustice that has been done to us. But in the modern world, now, we don't get mad, right? We get even. Yeah. And notice how the word even is built right into the word revenge. And oh, how we love our revenge. How do we put it? Best served cold. My students call this the pirate laugh of revenge. R, R, R. And for so many of us, with each act of revenge, we get a little hit, a little energy of feeling of accomplishment or some kind of a paid back. And with that comes a little chemical hit of adrenaline and other chemicals that give us a bit more of a hit. You get energized, blood rushes through you, your heart beats faster. This is nature's ways of helping us get through fights. But you don't have to be in a physical fight to experience the same rush. Resist, resent, revenge works just as well. And so many of us live our whole lives in this cycle of resist, resentment, and revenge. We engage in the world, we get a result that we judge negative, resist, resent, revenge, Someone does something that irritates us, resist, resent, revenge, It's even in the old tribal holy books, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And we're still practicing it even this day, even though logic dictates that this eventually ends up with the whole world being blind and starving to death. But there is that rush. Aha! This is where we have a blind spot, traveling on this tightrope of life in the dark. But you remember earlier we talked about learning to see in the dark? Here's where our ability to see in the dark comes in handy to save us from what the URANTIA book calls antecedent causation. Laws of cause and effect. In paper 111 it tells us this: you cannot completely control the external world environment. It is the creativity of the inner world that is most subject to your direction, because there your personality is so largely liberated from the fetters of the laws of antecedent causation. There is associated with personality a limited sovereignty of will, what we call free will. You decide in what direction you go. In paper 112, it tells us about personality and free will. It says, it is not wholly subject to the fetters of antecedent causation. It is relatively creative or co-creative. When bestowed upon evolutionary material creatures, us, it causes spirit to strive for the mastery of energy matter through the mediation of mind. Matter, mind, and energy. The URANTIA book tells us that spirit is a substance outside of mind, and we must reach for it. And when we grasp it, it works through our minds to lift us to higher levels of meaning and higher levels of action, choices, and better results. Personality and this antecedent causation remind us of that old saying, I got out of my karma to free my dogma. If you think karma is this mechanism whereby you get back what you send out, you reap what you sow, this law of antecedent causation says that the universe gives us something that we have always called grace. Grace is something we really need to know about. You never get back all the error that you put out if you learn from your mistakes. When we remember that the light in the dark comes on if we call on it, we will then stand back and reflect on our actions. When we shine a light on what we're doing, we begin to see that we live and function on different levels of meaning. And that this level here that we're talking about is the first level of meaning on our pathway to a better life. And we can look back at all of the different civilizations that have come before us, and we can see that they've each been functioning on different levels of meaning, beginning from fear, through anguish and dread, to awe and reverence. And so we see that the spiritual journey is now to lead you up through recognition, realization, and appreciation to a level of meaning on the 6th level called love. Here's how this works. When we remember that the light in the dark comes on if we call on it, and when we stand back and reflect on our actions and what's taking place here, what we are doing is calling on our observer self to come into the darkness and shine a light on the problem. This is the objective self. This is the self-conscious being able to look back on what it's doing, reflecting on itself and its interaction with the environment. The first thing that we see is the problem comes to us in a kind of a feeling way. Often, this is guilt about what's taking place. And when enough of this takes place, we begin to feel what is called dysphoria. That's the opposite of euphoria. It's a state of unease, general dissatisfaction with life, what we call a real bummer, or just bummed out. And often it leads us to this sense of victim. Resist, resent, revenge is victim mode. As long as we are in it, as long as we stay in it, we are saying, look at what you have done to me. So in order to break this cycle of victimness and RRR, the one-word answer is logic. When we bring that observer self in, the first thing we recognize is that we've moved our intention from our original purpose. Our original purpose was to go out and earn a bag of money. But we have moved to fault, blame, and this RRR, resist, resent, revenge game that we're playing. And once we start to bring our feelings into this equation and realize that we have hurt someone or that we start to feel crummy with this dysphoria, we begin to move up the levels of meaning. When I don't want to live like this anymore, we then move to the second level of meaning, the level of the feelings. And this is where the earlier discussion around intuition and common sense come into play. The URANTIA book calls this first level of meaning the level of the flesh, and it's a purely selfish and self-serving approach to life in general, the issue. The sense of feeling or guilt is the consciousness of the violation of the mores, the kind of rules that we live by. It's what animal origin human consciousness functioning on the first level of meaning does. It's fear-based. When we move to the second level of meaning, the level of the feelings, this is a plane one level higher than that of the flesh, and it implies that a sympathy and a pity would embrace one's interpretation of the rules of living. Let's say, right? Your mother taught us, treat others the way you would like to be treated. When we move to this second level of meaning, we begin to reach into that spiritual aspect, that intuition and that common sense, that beginning of wisdom that tells us that we need to exercise a little bit of self-control. Once we take personal responsibility, we begin to look back at what it was that got us into this problem in the first place, not on fault and blame. Common sense allows us to then look at and examine our intention, whether it was high or low, whether it was to help others or whether it was self-serving, and to examine our own preconceived opinions, settled ideas, and long-standing prejudices that have brought us to the conclusions, the beliefs, and the truths that we believe that got us into this problem. So we must look at that intention and figure out what's going on with that. Remember, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Even though we've had a good intention, we've failed at this particular task. But each time we do that, when we take personal responsibility, what happens is our self-respect moves up one tiny notch. And when we do this, it moves us up the levels of meaning, the levels of understanding why we do what we do. So these are the superpowers we talked about back in the previous section. Intuition, common sense, leading to the recognition of self-control and personal responsibility. That responsibility is the ability to respond appropriately to the situation and to deal with it. And this moves us up to the third level of meaning, what the URANTIA book calls the level of mind. And it reads, now come into action the reason of mind and the intelligence of experience. Good judgment dictates that such a rule of living, such as treat others like you would like to be treated, should be interpreted in consonant with the highest idealism embodied in the nobility of profound self-respect. We see that when we move up, when we exercise these superpowers and begin to bring them into our life, begin to understand why we do what we do, move from the subjective self to the observer self, and bring that in as a helping agent, we begin to improve our self-respect. And self-esteem is related directly to self-respect. So when we understand that when we reach for spirit, we grasp it and bring it in to our mind energy system, that spirit is divine purpose, and spirit mind is divine purpose in action. Energy is thing. Mind is meaning. Spirit is value. Even in time and space, mind establishes those relative relationships between energy and spirit, which are suggestive of mutual kinship in eternity. Mind transmutes the values of spirit into the meanings of intellect. Volition, choice, has power to bring the meanings of mind to fruit, results, in both the material and spiritual domains. When we exercise this, we get results in our material environment, and we get results or fruits of the spirit in our own mind system. And when we do, life improves. Here, the URANTIA book tells us that the keys to success are sincerity, and more sincerity. Everyone has these keys. We use them, advanced in spirit status, by decisions, and more decisions. The highest moral choice is the choice of the highest possible value. But action, completion of decisions, is essential to the evolutionary attainment of progressive achievement. One must do something as well as be something. People who don't do anything don't go anywhere. We get caught up in the paralysis of analysis and don't create anything beyond our previous intention. In paper 112, the URANTIA book tells us that life is really a process that takes place between the organism and the environment. And it's recognized that this phenomenon of stimulus and response is not just a mechanical process, since the personality functions as a factor in the total situation. It is ever true, mechanisms are innately passive, organisms innately active. Since our inner life is truly creative, there rests upon each personality the responsibility of choosing as to whether this creativity shall be spontaneous and wholly haphazard, or controlled, directed, and constructive. As we talked about in the last episode, the resume virtues balanced with the eulogy virtues, the inner and the outer world. Now this is quite an extraordinary bit of information, but this is the key to a happy life, to creativity, to returning good for evil. Personal transformation and spiritual liberation are ours with the choosing. With this knowledge, anything is possible, for we are free from the past and the shackles of our past deeds. From within, we can change who we are to become, who we want to be, and it is only up to our own free will to decide and make those choices and decisions, and then follow it up with actions and behaviors that lead us to positive results. However, it is not easy to go against the ingrained biological tendencies in an effort to follow our spiritual leadings. This is why the URANTIA book fully explains a system of spiritual technology that will enable us to better control our innate animal natures and to allow us to move towards self-mastery, using the power of the mind and the lure of the spirit. But, as it tells us, it's sad to record that so few persons on URANTIA take delight in cultivating these qualities of courageous and independent cosmic thinking.
Imagine we were living in a village almost 3,000 years ago, and we woke up each day to a sight like this. As humans, we're almost compelled to try to understand and to explain things like the heavens above. But 3,000 years ago, our only tools for probing and exploring such things would have been our eyes, our minds, and that narrow set of beliefs and opinions, that little box within which our tribe could think. This famous little picture illustrates what's going on. Our tribe, our society, builds for itself a view of the world. This worldview becomes the frame in which we think. It's like a box of concept and culture within which we live. But there's always someone who starts to think outside the box. Which raises the question, how do we discover new things? As a group, how do we agree to accept some new idea as being true? When confronted by something we don't understand, when the cause of some effect is utterly mysterious, how do we respond? Well, as natural storytellers, our reflex is to make up a myth. In paper 115, the URANTIA book puts it like this. If mind cannot fathom conclusions, if it cannot penetrate to true origins, then will such mind, unfailingly, postulate conclusions and invent origins, that it may have a means of logical thought within the frame of these mind-created postulates. This is not to criticize our systems of faith and belief, just to emphasize that as humans we are constrained to live and to dream within that framework of concept and belief that we and our society have been able to evolve. And as long as our myth remains consistent with our beliefs, or with the data we've been able to collect, we have a status quo. But a few hundred years ago, we discovered a way to step past such status quo. The scientific method. The true scientific method became a technique for evolving our own beliefs. It's helped us to learn something about the material world, even to glimpse the mechanisms of material life. But about ourselves, well, not so much. The phenomenon of man remains mysterious. In some ways, we're still in the same place as that poet in Palestine almost 3,000 years ago, whispering to his God, "What is man that you are mindful of him?" Even today, this remains a really good question. Why should the author of reality be interested in us? What's one more planet full of humans to the creator of an eternal infinity? This is precisely the question addressed by the URANTIA book. Now, at first glance, some may say, they're a bit long-winded, weren't they? 196 separate papers, over 2,000 pages of text. Others, like those of you who know personally the source of truth and love, may say, well, yes, but they've made some simple truths way too complex. Okay, but if this answer is to be appropriate for the skeptical scientific age ahead, if it is to be sufficient for scientists and philosophers, for mystics and religionists alike, think what was required. Before they could begin to explain our bodies and our minds, they had to adjust our basic assumptions about biology and psychology. Before they could begin to explain how worlds and stars and galaxies like ours evolve, they had to rework the foundations of our entire physics and cosmology. And before they could even begin to explain how we are salvaged from death, they had to reveal something of the extraordinary domain which bridges the material with the spiritual. And of course our beliefs, ideas, and experiences of this spiritual or numinous domain could do with some clarification. All this preliminary explaining and setting up implies a biggish book, and here it is, all 2 kilos, as first printed. So how do the authors of these papers answer that poet's simple question? What do they say is man? Why do they say might some God be mindful of us? Who are we? What are we doing here? What fresh ideas do these papers bring to the table? What revelations about ourselves do these revelators reveal? Here we face an issue. While personal revelation of truth and love unfolds within in ways too deep for words, a planetary or epochal revelation, as these papers claim to be, needs to be planted in a way that we can easily share. As words, as a set of those ideas whose time has come, as a framework of concept that can be grafted onto the paradigms our cultures have evolved. And this is what's being attempted here, to allow them to present appropriate answers to this simple, crucial question. The authors of these papers had to sketch out a cosmology, a universe frame big enough and consistent enough to contain the answers they are attempting to give. Which raises another question. What sort of answers are we, skeptical, scientific 21st century souls, willing or able to accept? What kind of answers does our scientific method even allow us to explore? Are telescopes our only means of contact? As a world, we anticipate contact with more than human life, but our scientific method has led many to believe that we are nothing but an evolutionary accident, that no display of energy nor expression of trust can carry us personally beyond the grave. You can see the problem. How on earth to deliver, to present a wider view of the world, a bigger frame, to a skeptical, scientific age?
A short clip from the URANTIA Book for Dummies. Please click the subscribe button above and then follow these links for a full presentation of this briefing. Thank you.